Remembering there's in essence 3 ways we can look at the guitar, and I'm more and more convinced that the best way to kind of approach the guitar is to try to look at the guitar from the different perspectives and try to avoid the idea of saying, all right, I know the guitar this particular way, and therefore I'm not going to look at it from the other perspectives. I'm going to try to convert every other perspective to my perspective because I know that works. That's a good thing to do, to be able to convert back and forth, but also it's good to kind of expand out of your comfort zone and try to look at it from the actual standpoint of the different perspectives, converting possibly what we already know to a different way of looking at it. So what are the main perspectives we look at it from? We look at the guitar from basically shapes, which we can imagine the caged system, for example, open position shape. We learn the chords, and then we might move those shapes up the guitar, which helps us to line up specific positions, in particular, typically 5 positions on the neck that are that way because they fit basically 4 fingers. That's what the guitar's time is designed to do. So then we can start to label these shapes that we kind of break out across the neck that kind of line up very nicely oftentimes to those open position shapes, and we can learn those particular shapes. That is great. We can also, however, get a little bit more in depth and try to figure out the intervals, which helps us to basically identify not just the note. That's not really the most important thing oftentimes. The most important thing is the relative position in the scale that we're playing, and that helps us to build chords in particular because the chords can be thought of as relationships, intervals between notes. And then we can also learn it from formula perspective, which is something more likely to do on a piano, which is lined up on 1 string. More difficult to do on a guitar because when we count up on the strings, we go up across the fretboard. So we have a grid format on the guitar, which makes it a little bit more difficult. But if we can do that, and that's our perspective that we're working on now, it gives us a whole nother kind of way to basically look at the guitar. And it allows us to really see how to count up the guitar when I switch from string to string, which is something that people aren't often good at because we just remember the shape. And we say, well, that shape is what it is. And then I can start to memorize the notes in that shape. But what I'd like to do is do what piano players often do, is be able to count up the guitar in formula format, but instead be able to count it up as I move from string to string, hopefully going down and back up. Right now, we're really kind of focused on going one way as we get better and better at this, as I'm basically able to present it, hopefully more and more succinctly. So that's going to be the idea. Now, also, most people learn the formula just from the perspective of the major scale, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. But if we start it from any other perspective, we would generate the same notes, but from a different starting point. That would be the different modes. So this is another way I'd like to be able to look at the formula and see the relationship between the modes by just saying, hey, look, I'm just playing the same thing, but I'm starting from a different standpoint, similar to if I was going in the alphabet and I started saying the alphabet from the middle of the alphabet or counting backwards from like a D or something like that. I want to get good enough that I can count up and back similar to what we can do numerically because we're used to having rocket countdowns, 10, 9, 8, but we don't really count it back in terms of letters, right? We never really go C, B, A, right? We don't really do that. But we want to be able to do that with regards to the guitar. I want to know every interval backwards and forwards because that gives me the most agility mentally to think about what other things I want to do. Like how do I want to put these things basically together? And so you would think that would be easy, but it's not. It takes practice to kind of count it up and back and think about every kind of interval. And so that's what we're doing now. So let's first just do a quick recap. We're going to basically be focusing in on going from the 5th to the 6th. So first I'm just going to do a quick recap of the major scale on 1 string, noting that we're going to go up to the 12th fret and then go back over to the 0 fret. So we're going to stay within, in essence, 1 octave of the strings because every note is in that 12th fret spot. And then I'm gonna skip. I'm gonna start to think about the change when I go from the 5th to the 6th, and think about that interval on each string is our objective. We'll see how far we get with that. So let's do a quick recap, and we're going to start on the C here and just do a quick recap of our intervals if we go from the C. Now, all the color notes are going to be in our scale. If I was on one string, it would be similar to the piano. If I was on that C, we're going to say from the first of the major scale to the second of the major scale is going to be a whole step. I also want to start to think about the modes related to each step in the scale. And I can think about the modes, remember, by basically the shape that it's in. So I can break down the shape into like what I call the box shape. So I call this like the pillar box shape, or the house here. This is going to be what I call the hamburger. And then here's the box again, box pillar, right? Box post, or whatever you want to call it. Double stop box is what I was calling it. But it's been shifted up because of the kink in the tuning, meaning this is what I call the fault line. And so this tectonic plate have shifted forward. So the box is now split this way, but you can see it's the same shape here. If I can label each note as the beginning of each mode, that's going to help me once again to switch from mode to mode, but also help me to create chords that are going to be in the same key, in this case of the major scale, the C major scale. So I'm going from the first to the second is a whole step. Here's the formula, whole step, going from the first to the second. And that would be going from, if I look at it from a modal standpoint, the Ionian mode, which is the major scale, to the second mode, which I'm going to call mode number 2, the Dorian mode. And then I'm going from the second to the third of the major scale is a whole step. So we can see that here because I'm skipping a note. So now we're going from the second to the third is a whole step. And then that's also going from the second is the Dorian, what I'm calling absolute mode number 2, to absolute mode number 3, which is going to be the Phrygian. Now this repeats because I'm on the 12th fret here, that repeats on the top. So I'm going to go around in a circle, imagining that our string was in like a circle, right? So that we can go back to the top here. So now we're going to go from the open E. So I'm going to go from the open E to the F, and that's going to go from the third to the fourth. I'm trying to get my pick in my finger here. Third to the fourth, which is going to be a half step. So from 3 to 4 is going to be our half step. So we're going to go from here to here. And so that is also going from absolute mode number 3, which is the Phrygian, to absolute mode number 4, which is the Lydian. And then I'm going from the 4th to the 5th. 4th to the 5th is a whole step. That's going from absolute mode number 4, the Lydian, to absolute mode number 5, the Mixolydian. In our key, it's going from F to G. So now we're on the 5th, and so we're going from the 5th to the 6th. So here's the 5th to the 6th is a whole step. So we're going whole step from the 5th to the 6th, which is going from absolute mode number 5, Mixolydian, to the first of the absolute mode number 6, which is the Aeolian, otherwise known as the minor scale. So going from the 5th to the 6th, and then we're going from the 6th to the 7 is going to be a whole step. So we're going from absolute mode number 6, Aeolian or minor scale, to absolute mode number 7, the Locrian. So it's going to be a whole step. And we're going to go, and then we're going to go from the 7 to the 8. So we go from 7 to the 8, and we're going to go from 7, that goes around the horn, to 8, which is going to be our half step, going from absolute mode number 7, Locrian, to absolute mode number 1, which is Ionian, otherwise known as the major scale. That's the leading tone that takes us back home. So when I'm in the major scale, notice where the half steps are here. It's going from the 7 back home. That's easy to remember in a major scale because that's the leading tone that kind of pulls you back to home. And then it's going from the 3 to the 4, the 3 to the 4. Now, you can, that whole step and half, those two half steps will always be the same in all the other modes, but I don't want to really remember that it's going from B to C and from E to F. You can kind of remember that going from E to F is the natural half step when you're not looking at sharps and flats. That's kind of useful to remember. But what I really want to be able to do is look at the relative positions and be able to say, well, the relative position of going from the 7 to the 8 and going from the 3 to the 4. And then when I move to a different mode, like if I go to the Dorian mode, I want to be able to try to orient my mind into the proper position to now look at the half steps and see where that half step is going to be, 2 to the 3 and 6 to the 7. If I'm looking at it from the perspective of the Dorian, which is the same thing, it's just that I'm starting from the second position, which I'll try to basically emphasize more as we go. Let's do the same thing on this position. So if I'm trying to stay in this four-fingered position, this is what a lot of people call position number 1. That's the pentatonic 7-note scale, but that would be in an A minor because I started from A to A. But if I started from the C to C, it would be a C because it's just a different mode, same notes. So now let's count this out again and stay in this position. So if I was here, I'm going from the first to the second. So I'm going to go from the first to the second. But instead of going out here, I'm going to go back here. So here's where the problem is, because how do I do that if I'm not on the same string? Well, it's a whole step to go here. To go down here, it's pinky to pointer. Pinky to pointer is a whole step. How do I know that? Well, if I count it out, every string has a 5-note distance between it. So it would be 5, 4, 3, 2. It's a 2-note whole step between the first and the second. So I went from, and that's also going from the Ionian to the Dorian. So then if I go from the 2 to the 3, so now I'm in position. So I'm going to go from the 2 to the 3. So it's going to go from the D to the E. So to do, it's a whole step. 2 to 3 is a whole step on the major scale. It's also going from absolute mode number 2, the Dorian, to absolute mode number 3. So going from the Dorian to the Phrygian is always going to be a whole step. You can see that this Phrygian is now located in what I call the house, the box. It's always in the basement on the lower left of the box. And then we're going to go from 3 to 4 is going to be where our half step is. That's going from the absolute mode number 3, Phrygian, to absolute mode number 4, the Lydian. And that's always going to be a half step, or going from Phrygian to Lydian is always a half step. We're at the bottom of the box that you can see now, right? We're at the bottom of the house, going from what I would say the basement to the other major mode over here, which is going to be the Lydian. And then we're going to go from, I'm going to repeat this on over here. Wait a sec. I'm on the 4 to the 5. So the 4 to the 5 is going to be a whole step. So we're going to go 4 to the 5 as a whole step. Now that would be going out here typically, but I'm going to skip the string down. So I need to go a whole step. So that's going to be pinky to pointer. So pinky to pointer. How do I know that's a whole step? Because I know there's a 5-note distance between the strings. So that would be 5, 4, 3, 2. So there it goes back down to here. And that's going to the 4 to 5, which is going from absolute mode number 4, Lydian, to absolute mode number 5, which is the Mixolydian. And then we're going to go from the 5 to 6, which is a whole step, going from the G to the A. So that's a whole step. And that's going from absolute mode number 5, which is Mixolydian, to absolute mode number 6, Aeolian, or minor scale. So there's always going to be a whole step between Mixolydian to Aeolian, and then we're going to go from the 6 to the 7 is a whole step. I could go out here, but that's outside my shape. So within each of these shapes, by the way, I never go more than 4 frets at a time. So that's going to be going too far out. So I'm going to pull it back into my shape here. So now once again, pinky to pointer back here, and that's going to be a whole step, and I know that because it's going to be a 5-note distance here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 2-note away whole step, or major second. And so that went from absolute mode number 6 to absolute mode number 7 otherwise known as the Aeolian, minor scaled to the Locrian. And now you can see I'm on the Locrian, which is like in the attic of our box. The box looks skewed because you have the tectonic plate here shifted to the right because the fault line is between the G and the B string, but we're still like kind of in the attic, if you can see it, if you can see that. And then we're going to go from the 7 is a half step to go to the 8. So we're going to then bring it back home. 7 to 8, which is going from absolute mode number 7, which is the Locrian, to absolute mode number 1, the Ionian or the major scale. All right, so that's going to be the idea. So now let's do the same thing, but I'm going to focus in on my interval going from the 5 to the 6. So the 5 to the 6 is going from this G, and then we're going to be going to the A, and I'll do the A around this one string. So now we're gonna be counting up our formula to get to here, and then we'll go around this string, and then I'll count it to here, and then when I go to the A, I'm gonna jump back up to the top string, right? Just so we can see, we can break this interval up at that point and look at that step and play it through that step. Now the octaves are gonna be wonky, but we're gonna practice basically being able to do that step. Now the reason that's kind of useful is because if you look at this in a formula standpoint, that means to get to the next note, it's always going to either be a whole step or a half step away. So if I know the intervals that are a whole step or a half step on each string, then I'll be able to jump anywhere I want, to any string I want, as long as I'm only going to the next note in whatever scale I'm in, which will always only be a whole step or a half step away. So I'd kind of like to really know my whole step or half step concept, or how to get to a whole step or half step away on each string. And I'd like to know my scale formulas, and that will allow me to kind of move my scale formula around by taking any interval and switching to a different string and then playing through it on that other string. So that's kind of my objective. All right, before we keep going on that though,